Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a lonely rancher who found an Apache baby in a basket by the river. Samuel McKenna discovered the infant left deliberately in his path, but the truth behind why she was abandoned was more heartbreaking than he could imagine. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The discovery by the river. Samuel McKenna had been living alone on his ranch for 7 years, ever since fever took his wife Margaret and their unborn child during the harsh winter of 1882. The sprawling property along the Verg River in Arizona territory had once echoed with laughter and dreams of a growing family. But now it stood as a monument to solitude, tended by a man who had learned to find purpose in routine and silence. On this particular morning, in late September 1889, the autumn air carried the crisp promise of coming winter, and Samuel made his usual trek to the river to check his water traps and survey the irrigation channels that kept his modest cattle operation alive. The cottonwood trees along the riverbank had begun their seasonal transformation, their leaves shifting from green to gold, creating a canopy that filtered the early morning sunlight into dancing patterns on the water's surface. Samuel had always found peace by the river. It was where he came to think, to remember, and sometimes to escape the crushing weight of loneliness that had become his constant companion. The sound of flowing water had a way of drowning out the silence that filled his log cabin each evening, the same silence that reminded him of conversations that would never happen, and children's voices he would never hear. As he approached his usual spot near the bend where the river slowed and deepened, something unusual caught his eye. There, partially concealed by the tall grass and reeds that grew along the water's edge, was what appeared to be a woven basket. Samuel's first thought was that it had been washed downstream from one of the settlements upriver, perhaps lost during a river crossing or dropped by accident. But as he drew closer, he realized this was no ordinary discarded item. The basket was intricately woven with patterns he recognized as Apache craftsmanship, and it was positioned deliberately on a small patch of dry ground, elevated just enough to be safe from the water's reach. More disturbing still, he could hear sounds coming from within, soft, almost inaudible whimpering that made his heart skip a beat. Samuel approached cautiously, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he knelt beside the basket. When he carefully lifted the woven cover, he found himself staring down at the most beautiful baby girl he had ever seen. She couldn't have been more than a few months old, with thick black hair and deep brown eyes that seemed to hold an ancient wisdom despite her tender age. Her skin had the warm bronze complexion of the Apache people, and she was wrapped in a small blanket that appeared to be made from soft deerskin, decorated with tiny beads and patterns that spoke of loving hands and careful preparation. The baby looked up at him without crying, her dark eyes studying his face with an intensity that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Samuel had limited experience with infants, but even he could tell that this child was healthy, alert, and had been well cared for until very recently. "Well, little one," Samuel whispered, his voice rough from emotion and lack of use, "what are you doing out here all by yourself?" As if in response to his voice, the baby made a small sound that wasn't quite crying, but seemed to convey both contentment and need. Samuel noticed that along with the deerskin blanket, the basket contained a small pouch made from buffalo hide, and a piece of bark with markings that he couldn't read, but suspected might be some form of Apache writing or symbols. Samuel had lived in Arizona territory long enough to have respectful relationships with various Apache bands that still moved through the region. Unlike many of his neighbors who viewed all Apache as threats, Samuel had learned to distinguish between different groups and had even conducted peaceful trade with some of them over the years. He knew enough about their customs to understand that a baby would never be abandoned casually or without significant reason. The placement of the basket, the care with which the child had been prepared, and the deliberate nature of the location all suggested that this was not abandonment, but rather a desperate attempt to ensure the baby's survival. Someone had brought this child here specifically because they knew Samuel came to this spot regularly, and they had chosen to entrust him with something precious. As Samuel gently lifted the baby from the basket, he was struck by how small and vulnerable she felt in his large, work-roughened hands. She weighed almost nothing, and yet the responsibility of her life suddenly felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. The baby settled against his chest with surprising ease, as if she somehow understood that she was safe. "I guess you're coming home with me," Samuel murmured, carefully gathering the basket and its contents. "But first, we need to figure out why someone left you here, and whether they're planning to come back." The walk back to his ranch house seemed longer than usual, with Samuel acutely aware of every step and every movement that might disturb the precious cargo he now carried. The baby remained calm during the journey, occasionally making small sounds, but never crying, as if she understood that her survival depended on cooperation and trust. Samuel's ranch house was a solid log structure that he had built with his own hands during the early years of his marriage. It had been designed with the hope of housing a large family, and now its empty rooms served as painful reminders of dreams unfulfilled. As he entered the main room, Samuel was suddenly aware of how the space must appear clean but sparse, functional but lacking the warmth that comes from shared lives and daily companionship. He carefully placed the baby on his kitchen table, using a clean blanket to create a safe, soft surface. As he examined her more closely in the better light of his home, he could see that she was indeed healthy and had been lovingly cared for. Her hair was clean, her skin was clear, and her clothing, though simple, was well made and practical. Pouch from the basket contained several items that puzzled Samuel. A small amount of what appeared to be cornmeal, a few dried berries, and several items he couldn't identify. There was also a tiny necklace made from shells and small stones, so delicate that it was clearly intended for this specific child. But it was the piece of bark with its mysterious markings that held Samuel's attention longest. The symbols were clearly deliberate and meaningful, but without the ability to read Apache script, Samuel could only speculate about their meaning. As the morning progressed and the baby continued to remain calm and alert, Samuel found himself facing difficult decisions. Should he immediately seek out Apache contacts to try to return the child? Should he notify the territorial authorities? Or should he accept the implicit trust that had been placed in him and try to care for her himself? The baby solved the immediate decision by beginning to fuss in a way that clearly indicated hunger. Samuel had no idea what to feed an infant, but he knew he needed to find a solution quickly. His nearest neighbor was Mrs. Chun, whose husband worked one of the smaller claims along the river. She had raised several children and might have practical advice, but reaching her would require a 2-hour ride. As Samuel stood in his kitchen, holding a hungry infant and contemplating his limited options, he realized that finding this child had already changed everything about his carefully ordered, solitary existence. Whether he had been chosen deliberately or simply by chance, he was now responsible for a life that depended entirely on his decisions and actions. Loneliness that had been his companion for 7 years suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a preparation for this moment, when another human being would need all of his attention, care, and protection. Seeking answers and help, the baby's hungry cries grew more insistent as Samuel paced his kitchen, feeling more helpless than he had in years. He had faced drought, cattle rustlers, and harsh winters, but none of those challenges had prepared him for the immediate needs of an infant. Desperation drove him to attempt feeding her small amounts of water mixed with cornmeal from the pouch, but she rejected it, her cries becoming more distressed. "Easy there, little one," Samuel murmured, his own anxiety rising. "I'm going to get you help, I promise." Knowing he couldn't wait any longer, Samuel wrapped the baby securely in his coat and saddled his horse Thunder. The ride to the Chun family's claim would normally take 2 hours, but with a crying infant, every minute felt like an eternity. The baby's wails echoed across the desert landscape, occasionally attracting the attention of circling hawks that mistook the sound for wounded prey. Mrs. Chun was hanging laundry when Samuel arrived, and her eyes widened in shock at the sight of the gruff rancher holding a tiny Apache baby. Lee Mei Chun had emigrated from Canton with her husband 5 years earlier, and despite the language barriers and cultural differences, she had become known throughout the territory for her kindness and practical wisdom. "Mr. McKenna," she exclaimed, in her accented English, immediately reaching for the crying infant. "Where you find this baby? She very hungry, very scared." Samuel quickly explained the morning's discovery, while Mrs. Chun examined the child with practiced hands. Her expression grew increasingly concerned as she checked the baby's condition, speaking softly in a mixture of Chinese and English. "This baby may be 3 months old," Mrs. Chun announced, settling into a rocking chair with the infant. "She healthy, but need milk soon. I have goat milk. Maybe work for now." Samuel watched in amazement as Mrs. Chun's gentle touch and soft humming immediately calmed the baby. Within minutes, she had prepared a mixture of goat milk and water, feeding it to the infant using a cloth dipped in the liquid. The baby's desperate sucking and immediate contentment confirmed that hunger had been her primary distress. "She very beautiful baby," Mrs. Chun observed, studying the child's features carefully. "Someone take very good care of her before. Look at hands, fingernails clean, hair washed recent. This not abandoned baby, this baby given with love." Mrs. Chun's words confirmed Samuel's own instincts about the deliberate nature of the placement. This wasn't abandonment born of cruelty or indifference, but a desperate act of love by someone who believed they were ensuring the child's survival. "Mrs. Chun, I need to understand what was left with her," Samuel said, producing the piece of bark with its mysterious markings. "Can you make sense of any of these symbols?" Mrs. Chun examined the bark carefully, her weathered face creasing with concentration. "I not read Apache, but I know symbols for some things. This one," she pointed to a marking that looked like intersecting lines, "maybe mean crossroads or decision. And this," she indicated a circular symbol with radiating lines, "could be sun or day or time." She continued studying the markings, occasionally making soft sounds of recognition. "Mr. McKenna, I think this not just message. This may be map or instruction. See how symbols arranged? Like telling story or giving direction." Samuel felt a chill of understanding. If Mrs. Chun was right, then the bark wasn't just an explanation, but possibly directions for something, perhaps where to find the baby's family, or instructions for her care, or even a warning about dangers that had necessitated her placement by the river. "There's something else troubling me," Samuel admitted. "I've lived in this territory for 15 years, and I know most of the Apache bands that move through this region. I haven't seen any signs of recent camps or travel in weeks. If this baby's family is from around here, where are they?" Mrs. Chun's expression grew grave. "Mr. McKenna, you hear stories from town? About soldiers moving Apache families to reservation? About families broken up, children taken to government schools?" Samuel had indeed heard such stories, though he had tried to avoid involving himself in the complex and often brutal politics of Apache relations with the territorial government. The forced relocations, the separation of families, and the government's policy of civilizing Apache children by removing them from their families were ongoing sources of tension and tragedy throughout the territory. "You think someone left this baby to keep her from being taken?" Samuel asked. "Maybe," Mrs. Chun replied, gently rocking the now content infant. "Or maybe family forced to move quickly couldn't take baby on dangerous journey." Maybe someone hoped you keep her safe until they return. The implications of this possibility weighed heavily on Samuel. If the baby had been left in his care to protect her from forced relocation or family separation, then his decision about what to do with her became even more complex. Simply turning her over to territorial authorities might result in exactly the fate her family had tried to prevent. "Mrs. Chun, I need to ask you something important," Samuel said after a long pause. "I don't know anything about caring for babies. If I decided to keep her until I can find out more about her family, could you teach me what I need to know?" Mrs. Chun studied Samuel's face carefully, as if trying to read his true intentions. "This very big responsibility, Mr. McKenna. Baby need more than food and shelter. Need love, need touch, need someone talk to her, sing to her. You ready for this?" Samuel thought about his empty house, his solitary meals, his evenings spent in silence. The prospect of caring for an infant was terrifying, but the alternative potentially delivering this child into the hands of a system that might separate her permanently from her family seemed worse. "I think I have to try," Samuel said quietly. "Someone trusted me enough to leave her where I would find her. I can't betray that trust without at least trying to understand what they wanted." Mrs. Chun smiled for the first time since Samuel's arrival. "Then we start with basics. Baby need feeding every few hours, day and night. Need clean clothes, need warm place to sleep. Need someone hold her when she cry, someone keep her safe from danger." For the next several hours, Mrs. Chun provided Samuel with a crash course in infant care. She showed him how to prepare formula from goat milk, how to test its temperature, how to hold the baby properly during feeding. She demonstrated how to change the makeshift diapers she fashioned from clean cloth, how to swaddle the baby for comfort and warmth, and how to recognize the different types of cries that indicated hunger, discomfort, or simple need for attention. Most important thing, Mrs. Chun emphasized as Samuel practiced holding the baby, is that baby feel safe. She'd been through big change, separated from family. She need know that you protect her, that you're not going to leave her alone. As if to demonstrate this point, the baby began to fuss when Mrs. Chun tried to hand her back to Samuel. But gradually, as he held her and spoke to her in the gentle tone Mrs. Chun had taught him, she relaxed and settled against his chest. "See?" Mrs. Chun said with satisfaction. "She beginning to trust you. That very good sign." As the afternoon wore on, and Samuel prepared to return to his ranch with his new charge, Mrs. Chun packed a bundle of supplies: cloth for diapers, a small pot for warming milk, and several items of clothing she had hastily modified to fit the baby. "You bring her back tomorrow," Mrs. Chun instructed. "I check how she doing, make sure she eating enough. And Mr. McKenna, you not alone in this. Many people in territory have kind hearts. You need help, you ask?" The ride back to his ranch was markedly different from the morning journey. The baby slept peacefully against Samuel's chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. As the sun began to set over the desert landscape, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Samuel found himself talking to the sleeping infant. "Well, little one, I guess it's just you and me for now," he said softly. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I promise you this: I'll do everything I can to keep you safe and to find out where you belong." As they approached the ranch house, Samuel realized that for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't returning to an empty home. The baby in his arms represented not just responsibility, but also the possibility of purpose beyond mere survival. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficult decisions he would have to make about her future, Samuel knew that his life had been fundamentally changed by finding this small, vulnerable person who had been entrusted to his care. The truth revealed 3 weeks had passed since Samuel found the baby, and caring for her had become as natural as tending his cattle. He had named her Hope, though he whispered Apache words he remembered from his trading days, calling her Ayana, which meant eternal blossom. The baby had thrived under his care, growing stronger and more alert each day, her dark eyes following his every movement around the cabin. It was during a town visit that Samuel encountered Joseph running. Bear, a Yavapai Apache man who worked as a translator for the territorial government. Joseph had approached Samuel outside the general store, his weathered face grave with concern. "I hear you found Apache baby by river," Joseph said in careful English. "I need speak with you about this child." Samuel's protective instincts immediately flared. "What about her?" "My name Joseph Running Bear. I work with government, but I also help my people when I can. I hear about baby with marks on bark, and I think maybe I know her family." Samuel studied the man carefully. Joseph appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair braided traditionally and clothes that mixed Apache and white styles. There was something in his eyes that spoke of both sadness and determination. "You know who she is?" Samuel asked cautiously. Joseph nodded slowly. "I think she daughter of woman named White Dove. White Dove was my cousin's daughter. 3 weeks ago, soldiers came to camp near Payson. Said all Apache must go to San Carlos Reservation immediately. But White Dove, she had sick baby, too weak for long journey and desert heat." Samuel felt his heart beginning to race. "What happened to White Dove?" "White Dove begged soldiers to wait few days, let baby get stronger. But soldiers say no delays. Everyone must leave now or be considered hostile." Joseph's voice grew heavy with pain. "White Dove made terrible choice. She give baby to old grandmother. Tell her take baby to river where white rancher come every morning." The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Where is White Dove now? White Dove go with soldiers to San Carlos, but without baby. Every day, she asks when she can return for daughter. Soldiers say maybe never baby, better off with white family. Joseph's eyes flashed with anger. "This why grandmother bring baby to you. She know if soldiers find baby, they take her to government school, never let White Dove see her again." Samuel felt a mixture of relief and anguish. Relief that he finally understood the baby's story, and anguish at imagining a mother's heartbreak. Joseph reached into his jacket and pulled out a small piece of leather with symbols drawn on it. "I bring this from White Dove. She give to trader who know me. Ask me find her baby." Samuel examined the leather. "What does it say?" "It say, please keep my daughter safe. Teach her she is loved. If I die, tell her I chose life for her over life. With me. If I live, I come back when it's safe." Joseph's voice cracked. "Last part say, thank good man who keep my heart alive." The weight of this revelation settled over Samuel. The baby in his care wasn't abandoned. She was a child whose mother had made the ultimate sacrifice. "Joseph, is there any way to get White Dove back here? Any legal way to reunite them?" Joseph shook his head sadly. "Government not let Apache leave reservation without permission. And if White Dove try to escape, soldiers hunt her down, maybe kill her. What about if someone adopted the baby legally? Someone who could then take her to visit her mother?" "Maybe," Joseph said thoughtfully. "If white man adopt Apache baby, government might allow visits to reservation. But adoption take long time, many papers." Samuel made a decision that surprised even himself. "Then that's what I'll do. I'll adopt her legally, and I'll make sure she knows her mother and her heritage." Joseph studied Samuel with new respect. "This very big thing you offer. You understand what this mean? You become father to Apache child in territory where many people hate Apache." "I've been caring for her for 3 weeks," Samuel replied firmly. "She's already become like a daughter to me, and no child should be separated from her mother if there's any way to prevent it." Joseph was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with deep emotion. White Dove Mother chose well when she trusts you with her daughter. I will help you with adoption papers. I know Lawyer and Prescott, who help Apache families sometimes. Over thee. Following weeks, Joseph became a regular visitor to Samuel's ranch, helping with the legal process and teaching Samuel about Apache customs. He explained that the symbols on the bark were a map indicating the specific location and time Samuel usually passed by. White Dove know your habits from watching River for weeks, Joseph explained. She choose you not by accident, but because. Grandmother watch you, see you gentle with animals, see you respect Apache traders. Samuel learned that the items in the pouch had specific meanings. The cornmeal was blessed by White Dove for protection. The dried berries were from a sacred place, and the tiny necklace had been made by White Dove's own mother Dot as autumn turned. To winter, the adoption papers slowly made their way through territorial bureaucracy. Samuel had officially named the baby Hope Ayanna McKenna, honoring both cultures that would shape her identity. She had grown remarkably, becoming a bright, active child who filled Samuel's house with laughter. Mrs. Chun had become like a grandmother to Hope, and the baby showed signs of unusual intelligence, already responding to words in both English and Apache phrases Joseph taught Samuel. But it was Joseph who delivered the news Samuel had been hoping for and dreading. Adoption papers approved, he announced during a cold December morning visit. Hope Ayanna McKenna officially your daughter now. And I have other news. I get permission to take you and baby to visit White Dove at San Carlos. Samuel felt his heart leap. After 4 months of caring for Hope, he was finally going to meet the woman who had entrusted him with her most precious possession. When can we go? Samuel asked. Next week. But Samuel, Joseph's expression grew serious. You must understand White Dove very sick. Reservation hard on everyone, but especially hard on mothers separated from children. She may not live much longer. Samuel looked down at Hope, who was playing contentedly with a wooden toy he had carved. She had no memory of her birth mother, but Samuel was determined that she would know the story of White Dove's love and sacrifice. Then we leave as soon as possible, Samuel decided. White Dove has waited long enough to see her daughter again. The reunion and new beginning. The journey to San Carlos Reservation took 2 days through harsh desert terrain. Samuel held Hope close during the long wagon ride, while Joseph navigated the dusty roads with practiced skill. The baby, now 5 months old, had grown into a healthy, curious child who babbled constantly and reached for everything within her grasp. As they approached the reservation, Samuel was struck by the stark contrast between the barren government compound and the vast, beautiful landscape surrounding it. Wooden buildings clustered together like a prison camp, with armed soldiers patrolling the perimeter. The Apache people moved slowly between the structures, their faces reflecting the deep exhaustion of those who had lost everything. This place... Samuel began, then stopped, unable to find words for the despair he witnessed. Government call it protection, Joseph said bitterly. Apache call it slow death. Joseph led them to a small medical building where White Dove had been confined due to illness. Samuel's heart pounded as they approached the entrance, knowing that in moments he would meet the woman whose sacrifice had changed his life forever. White Dove lay on a narrow cot, her once strong frame reduced to skin and bones. Her long black hair was streaked with premature gray, and her dark eyes held the hollow look of someone who had endured too much loss. But when those eyes fell upon the baby in Samuel's arms, they blazed with sudden life. Ayanna, she whispered, the Apache. Word barely audible, Samuel carefully placed Hope in her mother's waiting arms, and the transformation was immediate. White Dove's face filled with such pure joy that Samuel felt tears streaming down his own cheeks. She spoke to the baby in rapid Apache, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She's saying how beautiful her daughter has become," Joseph translated. Softly, she's saying thank you to the spirits for keeping her baby safe. Hope, who had never seen her birth mother, seemed to recognize something familiar. She reached up to touch White Dove's face, babbling softly as if trying to communicate in their shared language of love. For the next hour, Samuel watched as White Dove held her daughter, singing Apache lullabies and examining every inch of the child she had been forced to abandon. Despite her obvious illness, her voice remained steady as she spoke to Samuel. "She want to thank you," Joseph translated. "She say you give her daughter gift she could not chance to grow up free and safe. She say you are answer to her prayers." Samuel knelt beside the cot. "Tell her that Hope has given me more than I could ever give her. She filled my empty house with purpose and love." When Joseph translated this, White Dove smiled through her tears and spoke again. "She says she can see in your eyes that you love her daughter like your own. This make her heart peaceful." Joseph paused, his own voice thick with emotion. "She say she want to give you something." White Dove reached beneath her thin pillow and withdrew a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Inside was a silver bracelet that had belonged to her grandmother. "For Ayana when she become woman," Joseph translated. "So she remember where she come from, even as she become part of your world." Samuel accepted the precious gift with reverence. "Tell her I promise Hope will know her heritage. She'll learn Apache traditions alongside everything else. She know the story of her mother's courage." As the visit continued, White Dove grew noticeably weaker, but her spirit remained focused entirely on her daughter. She taught Samuel a simple Apache lullaby, making him repeat the words until he could sing it properly. She showed him how to braid Hope's hair in the traditional way, her fingers moving with practiced grace despite her trembling. "She getting tired," Joseph observed as White Dove's eyes began to close. "But she want to say one more thing." White Dove gathered her remaining strength and spoke directly to Samuel, her voice firm despite her weakness. "She say if anything happened to her, you must not feel guilty. She say giving her daughter to you was not losing her, it was saving her. She say every day Hope live happy life is victory over those who try to destroy Apache families." Samuel understood that this might be the last time White Dove would hold her daughter. The knowledge filled him with both profound sadness and deep responsibility. "Tell her I swear on my wife's memory that Hope will grow up knowing she is loved by two mothers, her birth mother who saved her, and Margaret, who watches over us both from heaven." When Joseph translated this, White Dove smiled with peaceful acceptance. She kissed Hope's forehead one final time and reluctantly placed her back in Samuel's arms. 3 days after their return to the ranch, Joseph arrived with news Samuel had been expecting but dreading. White Dove had died peacefully in her sleep, her final words a prayer of gratitude for seeing her daughter one last time. Samuel grieved for a woman he had barely known, but whose courage had forever changed his life. He planted a garden in White Dove's honor, filled with native plants that would bloom each spring in remembrance of her sacrifice. As Hope grew, Samuel kept his promises. He taught her Apache traditions alongside English customs, ensuring she understood both sides of her heritage. Mrs. Chun helped with the cultural education, and Joseph became like a grandfather, visiting regularly to share stories and traditional knowledge. By her 3rd birthday, Hope spoke both English and Apache fluently. She knew the story of her brave mother, who had chosen love over keeping her close. She understood that she belonged to two worlds and could honor both. Samuel had built a prosperous ranch that provided security for their future. But more importantly, he had built a loving home filled with laughter, learning, and respect for all cultures. The lonely man who had found a baby by the river had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most difficult challenges. Hope Ayanna McKenna grew up strong, intelligent, and proud of her dual heritage. She became a bridge between two worlds, carrying her mother's courage and her father's determination. And every night, Samuel would sing her to sleep with the Apache lullaby White Dove had taught him, ensuring that a mother's love transcended even death. The basket that had held her by the river still sat in Hope's room, now filled with treasures. From both cultures, a reminder that love knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most beautiful families are formed not by blood alone, but by the conscious choice to protect and cherish what is most precious.